The midnight flight from Seattle to New York was hushed and dark when Grace Holloway boarded. The 28-year-old executive, utterly spent, drifted off and slumped onto the shoulder of a stranger. No one on the aircraft realized this quiet man was a struggling father working double shifts to pay for his 6-year-old daughter's heart surgery. Then the airplane suddenly hit severe turbulence. Grace woke up with a gasp, shocked to find his warm coat carefully tucked over her shoulders. His own arm pressed hard against the metal frame, shielding her gently the entire time she slept. Yet what truly shattered her icy defenses after landing was a quiet revelation that neither of us could have ever anticipated. Cold rain drenched the airport runways on a freezing Thursday evening late in October. Storm clouds beat against the terminal windows, blurring the bright runway lights outside. Grace Holloway stood all alone at Gate B-17, her small bag in hand and a completely exhausted look on her face. It was a silent expression of deep burnout her assistant knew all too well. A state she reached only when her spirit was drained and she had nothing left. At just 28, she carried the weight of her family's massive company. She wore a sharp black blazer over a clean shirt that hid 72 painful hours of sleeplessness and crushing anxiety. Her major business deal had shattered. 3 days of agonizing arguments and 2 long, lonely nights of worry. Then came the cold silence of defeat as the lawyers walked away, leaving her efforts completely broken. Angry messages from investors flooded her screen. The board demanded immediate answers, while the media eagerly mocked her falling profits under a cruel headline. Is the Ice Queen finally melting? She kept her grief entirely secret. Her beloved father had passed away recently, and she was fighting with everything she had to honor his final, unfinished dream for the company. Meanwhile, near the back of the boarding queue, a gentleman in a faded jacket stepped aside for an elderly woman. He sought no attention or gratitude, offering help with quiet, unassuming grace. A warm smile crossed his face as she thanked him, before he looked back at his phone. His name was Caleb Ryan, aged 32. He possessed the quiet strength of someone accustomed to long, physically demanding days. His rough, calloused hands spoke of hard work far better than any resume ever could. He carried a worn but tidy bag, and hidden inside the pocket was a small medicine bottle bearing the name of his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Caleb worked as a dedicated maintenance technician and had just completed an exhausting training course in Seattle. Despite his fatigue, he called home twice a day without fail. He needed to hear her voice and ensure she was safe with their kind neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, while away. Their quick chat that night was filled with pure love. Little Lily pressed her face to the screen, whispering with sweet urgency, "Don't forget the moon cookies, Daddy." Smiling, he scribbled the reminder on his boarding ticket so he would not let her down. Fate has a gentle way of connecting souls. Grace took seat 14A right next to Caleb. She dismissed him quickly, guarded against a stranger she did not know. She dismissed him almost instantly, unaware of the gentle soul sitting right beside her. Opening her laptop, she desperately fought a heavy work report dragging her down since Tuesday. She did her best to ignore him, treating this gentle stranger like invisible furniture. Caleb quietly settled in, turning on a podcast about electrical engineering. Resting his heavy head back, he offered her nothing but peaceful silence. Their late-night flight finally climbed into a dark, stormy sky 40 minutes late. Soon after takeoff, the cabin lights faded, leaving them in darkness. The turbulence hit hard. Over the speakers, the pilot calmly promised that the rough weather would pass soon. Expecting things to calm down, Grace just kept typing away fiercely. Her bright computer screen flickered, the only light left in their quiet row. Her exhausted fingers raced across the keys, desperate to finish, driven by the cold resolve of someone refusing to face her own burnout. Yet high above Idaho, her deeply exhausted body could not fight anymore. Her heavy eyelids finally fluttered closed against her own will. Her tight shoulders relaxed as the powerful executive slipped into a deep sleep. This brilliant tech leader, known for her fierce walls, collapsed fast asleep onto this gentle stranger's shoulder. Feeling her heavy weight press against his arm, Caleb gently looked down at her. Sensing the deep worry still carved into her face, he chose pure, silent compassion. He did not wake her. Instead, he shifted gently to keep her safe. Reaching up carefully with his free hand, He retrieved his jacket from above. He draped it over her, with the tender care of a father used to tucking in his own little girl. Passing by, a flight attendant noticed his quiet act of care and smiled warmly. "Your wife is really out," she whispered softly. Caleb gave a soft, sad smile, whispering back, "She must be completely exhausted." 40 minutes later, the violent turbulence returned, far more intense this time. The seatbelt sign dinged loudly as the entire plane began to shake violently. A sudden drop sent panicked passengers clutching onto their armrests for safety. Yet, Grace slept right through it. She was lost in a deep, unreachable sleep. You and I know that crash, when stress drains you until your tired body overrides every alarm. Fighting the drops, Caleb gripped the seat ahead, wrapping his other arm tight to protect her from slipping into the aisle. He kept her anchored safely against the violent movements of the plane. The hard armrest slammed painfully into his forearm twice. It bruised him deeply before he could adjust to a safer angle. When the turbulent flight finally smoothed out, 20 long minutes later, a dark bruise was forming on his arm, a quiet ache he would carry for 3 days. Still, he refused to disturb her. He chose to bear the physical pain to protect her. Across the aisle, an irritated passenger had been scowling at them since the turbulence started. "Hey, buddy," the man muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Just push her off. She is not your responsibility." Caleb quietly met his cold glare, remaining completely calm. "She is fine where she is," he whispered gently, turning back to the dark sky. The man muttered a bitter complaint and went back to his drink. You see, comforting her helped ease the heavy grief he still carried for his sweet Lily. He held on to the sweet memory of her sudden laugh, a soft, startled sound like a tiny hiccup. He remembered how tiny and fragile she looked leaving the hospital, wrapped tenderly in her little yellow coat. She had asked with absolute sweetness if they could get ice cream, even in the pouring rain. His ex-wife Dana had walked away 14 months ago. Calling from a quiet parking lot, her cold voice announced she was never coming back to them. Her final goodbye felt cold and empty, like a mere business transaction. "I am not equipped for this." She treated her own daughter's failing heart like a simple business loss, rather than a precious little girl who desperately needed her love. Yet Caleb never replied with angry or bitter words. Once the line went dead, he collapsed quietly onto the kitchen floor. He leaned his back against the cold cabinets and just sat there for hours. Then he stood up, made dinner, and began searching for pediatric heart specialists to save her. Let us step back onto that quiet flight. Beside him, Grace shifted softly, her fingers gently brushing his heavy sleeve. She held the fabric tightly, like a weary child seeking safety in a warm blanket. He looked down at her fragile hand, then quietly turned back to the dark window. Caleb did not see the tough executive from the magazines. He saw only a deeply wounded soul carrying an absolute bone-deep exhaustion. The heavy fatigue that settles in when you carry a massive burden alone for far too long. He knew that pain intimately. He faced that exact same sorrow in his own mirror every single morning. Suddenly, the cabin lights flicked on, and passengers began gathering their overhead bags. Grace woke up slowly, blinking through the disorienting haze of sleeping in an unfamiliar place. Then she froze, suddenly realizing exactly where her tired head had been resting all night long. Pulling away quickly, an anxious apology rushed from her lips. "I am so sorry. I do not know how," and then she suddenly stopped. Her eyes were fixed directly on his arm. A deep, painful purple bruise stretched all the way from his elbow down to his wrist. "You and I can feel the weight of this moment." She instantly saw the painful sacrifice he made. Her breath caught, and all her defenses completely melted away. For once, the guarded and brilliant Grace Holloway had absolutely no words left to say. "Why did you not wake me up?" she finally managed to ask. Out of habit, she kept her voice entirely flat. It was her armor, a shield used whenever unexpected gentleness pierced right through her walls. Caleb gently pulled his sleeve over the painful bruise, wanting to ease her guilt. He offered a soft shrug, as if they were just talking about a morning drizzle. "You were finally resting peacefully," he answered softly. "It looked like you really needed it." Grace could only stare. His tender response shattered every rule she had learned about a cold, indifferent world. His quiet, pure kindness disarmed her completely, like bracing for a harsh fall in the dark, only to be caught by gentle hands. She did not understand why this stranger's quiet grace touched her so deeply. Yet that comforting warmth followed her long after they left the runway. The walls Grace built around her heart by age 28 were born from a deeply painful past. Her cold father, Richard Holloway. He only showed love by demanding flawless success and endless hard work. In the end, we see she believed love had to be earned, never realizing it could heal. 6 months after his death, she still had not taken one day to weep. Her company, Holloway Dynamics, was mid-merger, and relentless duty demanded her presence. You and I know that feeling. She simply had no quiet space for her grief. The board originally voted against her taking over as chief executive. They pointed to her youth and inexperience. For 4 brutal months, they watched her constantly, waiting for any crack so they could force her out. Then came Marcus, an ex-boyfriend and senior partner at a competing firm. He spent 8 long months abusing her trust to steal sensitive company data. After taking what he wanted, he dumped her by text and joined a rival. Soon after, the harsh media crowned her the Ice Queen of Holloway Tower. She quietly chose to carry that deep pain, wearing the cold title like protective armor. Now, picture the bustling airport terminal. A gentle stranger named Caleb stepped in, pulling her stuck suitcase from where it had gotten stubbornly jammed at a strange angle in the overhead bin. The broken wheel had caught tightly on the edge of the compartment. He set it down and stepped back. Grace immediately reached for her wallet out of habit. It was her automatic defense whenever anyone showed her the slightest help. But he just raised his hand, gently shaking his head in refusal. "No need," he said softly. "You and I know that stunned look." She froze, completely lost on how to handle someone who wanted absolutely nothing in return for his quiet warmth. She was still processing that gentle moment. Then his phone buzzed and he stepped aside to answer a video call. She really should have just walked away to where her driver waited. Instead, she stood frozen. Amid the noisy airport crowd, a sweet, fragile little voice caught her attention. "Daddy, my heart did not hurt as much today. The doctor said that is good." Then, without pausing, "Did you manage to get the moon cookies?" Caleb's weary shoulders shifted, showing a father choosing to smile through his deep worry. "First thing tomorrow, little bug," he whispered. Grace gripped her suitcase and hurried toward the exit without looking back, mostly because she could feel her cold armor cracking open, revealing a raw pain she was not ready to face. For 3 whole days, his quiet kindness haunted her. She tried telling herself it was just professional curiosity. A minor detail she needed to solve, a strange puzzle she could not control. By the 4th day, she ordered her assistant, Marcus, to dig into his background. Her assistant spent the better part of a whole morning investigating, returning to her private office looking completely stunned. Caleb Ryan, 32 years old, a certified technician working for a small maintenance firm. No criminal record, no massive debts, only a tiny student loan nearly fully paid off. No social media accounts, and absolutely no warning signs on his clean record. He is as completely off the grid as any normal person gets, her assistant explained, but buried deep within his work history lay a heartbreaking truth that stopped Grace cold when she heard it. 7 years ago, Caleb was the lead engineer at Meridian Corp, a startup where he spent 14 long months quietly designing a brilliant new network routing architecture that they had. We have all witnessed such cruelty. They patented and sold it for $11 million, erasing him completely while he quietly endured. He tried fighting for justice in court but met only cold silence. Then, 3 months later, his precious little girl received her diagnosis. Grace quietly read through his background file 3 entire times. An old photo was attached to a hospital intake record from a year ago, just a tiny detail saved from public files. In that blurry picture, Caleb sat tiredly in a cheap plastic waiting room. He held his sweet daughter Lily's hand, smiling with a tender, gentle look of a devoted father who refused to let his own deep terror show. Grace stared at that moving image for a long time, sitting alone in her grand glass-walled corporate office, under cold lights with the steady hum of a highly successful company all around her, feeling for the first time in years. She could remember the quiet, tender ache of finally recognizing a beautiful soul in another person, something you and I so often hide from ourselves. Quiet tears had been falling for a full minute before she even noticed. Caleb, of course, had no idea. simply working on a freezing Brooklyn rooftop that cold Friday afternoon. 40 feet up a ladder in the biting wind, patiently replacing a broken transformer for a building freezing for 2 days. His gentle heart was focused on his daughter's crucial therapy session next Tuesday. He worried about his second shift delivery job starting exactly at 7. And the heavy, stressful math of paying this month's rent. Her vital medicine and the expensive copay his insurance denied. The $112 he lovingly moved from car repairs to her medical fund. Their small, warm home was 540 square feet, completely covered in her colorful drawings. A sweet gallery of bright crayon suns, playful dogs, and happy houses with smoking chimneys. Surely you and I know he never forgot that tired woman from the flight. He simply told himself that gentle lie every day since they landed. Exactly 1 week after their journey. A major glitch in the company's primary server network caused a sudden, partial computer blackout across 3 whole floors of their Manhattan high-rise. The busy tech team quickly found a corrupted node, but they were entirely blind to the true root cause. Meanwhile, the anxious IT director, a deeply stressed man named Garrett, a tired man who had survived 11 tough years at the firm, was frantically warning absolutely everyone nearby that they were facing a massive, catastrophic loss of critical data if the network wasn't fixed in 90 short minutes. Grace stepped into the chaotic room, pausing gently by the doorway, listening quietly to all the frantic updates when she suddenly noticed a calm, gentle man working across the chaotic space, kneeling quietly by an open floor panel with his testing gear. Caleb had not seen her, completely focused on helping them. The firm had called him in through a small agency for quick support. A hurried, desperate decision made only because their expensive internal team was panicking. And he had only been in the room for 22 minutes. In that short time, he gently asked for the layout map, studied it once, and went silent. Garrett had spoken to him coldly, using the harsh tone of someone who sees quiet, sincere skill as a threat to his pride, insisting that his highly paid team had already ruled out those specific connections. Caleb simply nodded with gentle patience and carefully checked them anyway. He quietly resolved the entire crisis in 11 minutes. Stick with me here. The flagged node wasn't the real issue, just a symptom of a deeper problem. The real issue hid in a misconfigured relay, a secondary junction quietly installed during an upgrade 6 weeks ago. It just sat there, waiting for the perfect moment of stress to trigger a collapse. If left alone for 40 minutes, it would have completely destroyed the primary backup system too. The room fell completely silent as Caleb explained this with a quiet, gentle efficiency, speaking the language of complex systems like it was his mother tongue. Garrett opened his mouth to argue back. But a junior tech checked his tablet, stared for a few seconds, and quietly whispered, "He is right." From the doorway, Grace quietly watched Caleb work with gentle curiosity. No wasted motion, no ego. He had none of the arrogant posturing she usually saw from people trying to prove themselves. The second the crisis passed, she watched 2 senior managers instantly push forward, trying to paint themselves as the heroes who saved the day. Caleb just stepped back without a word, letting them take the credit while his heart rested elsewhere. Then she noticed him reaching down for his worn, faded backpack. Through the open zipper, she caught sight of a sweet paper bakery bag with little string handles. His daughter's gentle promise echoed in her memory, "First thing tomorrow." His precious little bug, he had not forgotten her. The ache in her chest began to soften, feeling less like grief and more like warm understanding. You know that feeling? Finally letting a little light into a heavy burden you carried alone. She lingered in the doorway a moment longer, feeling something deep inside her frozen heart finally begin to soften and open up. It was quiet, not a sudden break but a gentle, beautiful thawing of her soul. She walked across the quiet room and gently called his name. He turned, and the sheer exhaustion on his gentle face touched her in an unexpected way. There was no guarded mask or nervous panic from realizing he was talking to the CEO. It was much softer. Just honest recognition, perhaps a quiet flicker of warmth before returning to his calm, safe space. That very afternoon, she reached out with a 3-month consulting offer. A special role reporting directly to her, offering incredible life-changing pay, and totally flexible hours, protecting the precious time he needed for his daughter's care. She designed it with care, wrapping her kindness in a professional contract so he would feel respected, not pitied. Standing outside, carrying the heavy weight of his world on his shoulders, he listened quietly. Then he answered with absolute, gentle honesty. "No, thank you." She waited for him to negotiate, hesitate, or make a polite excuse. But there was none. He truly meant it. He gently explained his heart. He could never accept work that pulled him away from Lily, and years ago he chose to protect his peace and avoid places where people are treated like cold, replaceable resources rather than human beings worthy of respect. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger or pride, just a beautiful boundary born from deep love which he gently but firmly chose to honor. So what about Grace? Perhaps a stranger's gentle kindness is exactly what will finally heal her. She stood in that corporate hallway, absorbing a beautiful, gentle truth. A man whose quiet dignity turned away everything her wealth could buy. 2 days later, her heart led her to his door, a step she hadn't fully planned. But the single father didn't open the door. Little Lily did. In striped pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, the girl met Grace with a purely honest stare. A completely unguarded look that only 6-year-olds can truly offer. "You're the lady from the airplane," Lily said. Grace just blinked. "Your dad told you about me?" Lily shook her head and gently stepped aside to let her in. "I saw your picture on TV," the little girl said. "Step inside with us." This home was small, honest, and warmer than any cold corporate suite. The comforting aroma of dinner cooking. Lily's bright drawings covered every surface. Stacked library books on the table, each marked by a colorful crayon bookmark. Near the kitchen counter, a wooden doorframe held Lily's growth marks in pencil. Years of tiny pencil lines with dates written beneath them. A beautiful record of a loving father who truly paid attention. Grace stood in the center, deeply moved by this quiet, loving atmosphere. She realized this gentle, healing family had a life so much richer than hers. Lily pulled Grace toward a small corner table, where a drawing lay waiting. The paper showed a tall figure wearing a bright blue jacket, protecting a sleeping winged figure on a plane with sheltering open arms. Lily pointed directly at the sleeping figure. "That's you," she said. "Dad said you were tired." Grace stared at the drawing for a long time. "He was right," she finally whispered, her eyes filling with warmth. She returned the following Thursday, and then every single week after that. She initially pretended to herself that it was just professional networking. But she only believed that lie for 2 visits before letting the truth in. What was truly unfolding was much simpler and a whole lot scarier. She kept returning simply because her heart craved their warmth. Because Lily would slide crayons across the table without ever having to be asked. Because this gentle home was the one place she was never forced to make a decision. Then one peaceful Saturday evening, they shared dinner on the floor because Lily declared the table far too boring. Grace sat on a floor cushion, completely ignoring her phone for 2 whole hours. The longest moment of pure peace she had known in many lonely years. She happily helped Lily color a magical dragon that was also, for reasons Lily found perfectly obvious, a beautiful princess. Caleb leaned against the sofa with a slice, speaking in a low, comforting tone. A gentle joke that made Grace laugh, a real, happy, unfiltered laugh. The kind of genuine joy that warms your chest before spilling out. It was a happiness she had not felt in years, filling her lonely heart with light. Later that night, while the child slept, he quietly shared his painful past. He shared his deepest wounds with simple grace, completely free of any anger. If we look closely, we see he chose kindness over resentment, showing her a better way. For years she had held on to her anger, but now she saw that the strongest hearts carry their pain gently, choosing love over bitterness to finally heal and move forward. He opened his heart about the night Lily was first admitted, about the cold, haunting look of a hospital. Picture that corridor at 2 in the morning, where your racing mind exhausts every option, leaving you with absolutely nothing to do except sit frozen in a cold plastic chair. Grace felt her own chest tighten with a heavy familiarity that had nothing to do with simple pity and everything to do with her own silent grief, sitting alone outside a hospital room the night her father's heart monitors finally flatlined. She shared the deep hurts she kept buried from everyone, even the betrayal by her ex, Marcus. Not the assistant, but the raw, crushing humiliation of realizing in Hindsight, how deeply she trusted a connection that was purely transactional. She confessed she choked back tears at her father's funeral because she had a board meeting 2 hours later, an emotional toll she had been silently paying for ever since. She confessed her secret fear that the cold, tough version of herself she built to survive was now the only part left. Caleb listened with the warm, patient attention of someone who understands deep pain, never filling her quiet moments with empty words she did not ask for. Then the lights went out, a frequent mishap in old buildings during freezing winters. He calmly found a flashlight, reached the breaker, and brought back power within 4 minutes. Meanwhile, his little girl woke up and crawled directly, seeking comfort, right into Grace's lap in the dark, showing the gentle trust of a child who finds a safe harbor and snuggles in. In the warm candlelight, Lily looked up, asking with the innocent, pure honesty of a child who simply wants to be loved, "Are you going to stay, Coco Grace?" The two scarred adults quietly locked eyes over that small, flickering flame. Neither of them had any words. Now let us fast forward 12 days to a Tuesday morning. A huge digital attack hit her company's servers at 6:43. By 8 o'clock, the devastating truth emerged. Highly sensitive client files were stolen, bundled together, and leaked over 3 days using stolen corporate access. By 9 in the morning, the company's stock crashed 14% at the opening bell. Grace hid her panic, arriving at the offices long before the hostile media gathered. She held the line in the war room with her chief security director. Her corporate attorneys wore a cold mask of total, calculated calm that everyone recognized, even though it brought no comfort to anyone in the room. Sebastian Cole himself demanded an emergency board meeting. At 61, he was one of the senior members of their board. A rival Grace always suspected of malice, though she could never prove his cruelty until this very moment. Even if she did not have the proof just yet. He dominated the boardroom with the cold, rehearsed timing of a man springing a trap. He framed the cyber attack as a failure of leadership, smoothly suggesting, with polite corporate words, that they must discuss replacing their chief executive officer. 3 allies nodded in unison, showing the smooth precision of conspirators who had planned this together. Meanwhile, Caleb was quietly called in to help. Garrett hesitantly asked him to help clean up the messy aftermath of the cyber attack. "You and I know true strength is quiet." 6 hours into his search, he found the anomaly. It was not hidden in the hack itself, but rather in the digital tracks left behind. Deep within the digital records of that one compromised account, they traced a series of quiet logins to a device registered by an employee recovering on medical leave during that vital time. Someone cold-heartedly used that account, hoping a sick coworker would take the blame. It was a silent, calculated betrayal that demanded a deep, trusted understanding of the company's private security network. Caleb gently brought these facts to Garrett. Garrett passed the file to Philip, Grace's deputy, secretly hired by Sebastian 6 years ago. Philip chose to bury the file quietly, refusing to sound any alarm. Grace only uncovered this because Caleb trusted her with the truth. You see, what followed was a cruel trap, not a meeting. Caleb was marched to the 18th floor on Sebastian's orders, forced to defend his honest search for the truth. Sebastian sat waiting in the room, catching a weary Grace off guard. He dominated the space with a cold, calculated, quiet malice, using cruel contempt as his primary weapon against them. He coldly stripped Caleb's identity, refusing to use his real name. He systematically attacked Caleb's character, his pure motives, and his judgment. But Caleb remained peaceful and strong, refusing to break. He answered each harsh question with gentle, unwavering honesty. Grace watched tenderly from the doorway. She saw his quiet grace, remembering the gentle soul who comforted her on that stormy flight and in his warm home. A good man who saw the malice aimed at him, yet choosing to protect his inner peace and dignity with a quiet mind. She stepped forward to stand protectively by his side. "That is enough," she commanded, her protective voice ending the cruel interrogation. "These findings belong to the security team under my personal care." For a brief moment, Sebastian's cold mask cracked, exposing his fear. Grace noted his sudden vulnerability. "Let's look closer," because 2 days later, a heartless rumor surfaced. It falsely accused the weary CEO of using her power to romance an innocent worker. They blamed anonymous corporate insiders. suggesting Caleb's honest work was just the result of favoritism. The lie was crafted with cunning malice, designed to be unprovable. Within 24 hours, the cruel poison had spread across the internet. Grace's lawyers quickly sent a cold, formal warning in writing, demanding she abandon the one gentle soul who had shown her kindness. Caleb read the heartbreaking headlines alone in his quiet kitchen late at night. He saw the cruelty behind the plan, realizing it wasn't meant to break Grace overnight, but to slowly drain her spirit, attacking her vulnerability, leaving her with no safe way to fight back. He wept inside, knowing they were weaponizing his simple, peaceful life to hurt her. Choosing love over bitterness, he sent her a gentle text, then went to softly check on his sleeping daughter Lily. Early the next morning, he selflessly offered to resign, but she refused to let him go. We know she fought back fiercely. She stood outside her door, her arms crossed, speaking in a low, determined whisper. She vowed never to let him suffer alone, refusing to sacrifice a good man just to protect her own career. Caleb gently explained that ease was never his goal. His heart was set on making a difference. It was always about helping others heal. The painful past was already written. Staying close allowed him to gather the real truth. Plus, over 4,000 employees relied on that corporate stability. Even as quiet sorrow was slowly breaking his spirit, Grace felt his tender strength, hated the injustice, but gently let him go. That very night, she reached out to an old family lawyer. Grace quietly asked them to pull up every single document they kept on. That old Meridian Core legal battle from 7 years ago. The truth was far more devastating than any rumor. Caleb had built the whole system over 14 months, documented in his personal notes. All time-stamped and verified, but when the company cashed in, an executive named Howard Finch completely wiped Caleb's name from the official patent. That same man secured a lucrative new job at the acquiring firm just months later. Caleb fought back with quiet honor. But the panel ruled against him, influenced by a corrupt committee, where an old board member hid a massive conflict of interest. That devastating timeline, the lost trial, his wife leaving him, and Lily's first illness, all within 5 brutal months. Grace read it 3 times, her heart breaking for him. Have you ever felt the weight of another's hidden pain? Grace carried that heavy truth late into the night when her phone rang. Little Lily was back in the hospital. Grace rushed through those sterile doors 20 minutes later, still wearing her formal corporate suit. She saw Caleb standing outside the room, staring blankly out the window, clutching a cold paper cup of coffee he had not even touched. Even from a distance, she could see his worn hands shaking ever so slightly. Hearing her hurried footsteps, he slowly turned around. In that single raw moment, she witnessed his deep agony, terror, and absolute exhaustion. The heavy burden of being the only soft light, keeping his little girl safe from darkness. But he quickly hid his grief, knowing his fragile daughter lay only feet away. A truly loving father like Caleb would never let Lily see his fear. Guided by pure empathy, Grace stepped in and wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders. She softly whispered, "You do not have to carry this heavy burden all alone." He froze. It was the sudden stillness of a kind soul who had not been held in years, unsure if it was finally safe to let go. Yet he did not pull away. Seconds passed, and he let his heavy head rest on her shoulder, finding a quiet moment of healing in that empty hospital corridor. Just a devoted father and a weary soul finding solace in simple, honest connection. 2 weeks later, Lily was stable and scheduled for a life-saving corrective surgery. Grace quietly stepped in behind his back. She secured a world-class medical team using her personal financial resources. Routing the funds through a charity, she spared him the direct hospital bills. She sincerely believed this quiet kindness would protect a strong man's dignity. But she completely misjudged the situation. You and I know that secrets always slip out. 3 days before surgery, a nurse accidentally mentioned the donor to Caleb. He drove straight to her apartment, and when she finally opened the door, his deeply hurt eyes told her instantly that she could not easily explain this away. You and I know he spoke with gentle honesty, not malice. And Caleb's gentle truth, carrying his own quiet pain, pierced straight to the reality she avoided. He revealed how she had invaded his only sanctuary, stripping away his final bit of peace. For years, this gentle father was dismissed, his worth overshadowed by the cold ambition of others. He just asked her not to weigh down his weary heart any further, despite her good intentions. 4 long days drifted by in complete silence. Grace absorbed that painful truth, realizing with sudden clarity that this kind soul was entirely right. Then on Wednesday morning, Sebastian launched his cold, calculated corporate ambush. He crafted a fake dossier, sleek and polished like a major legal brief, tailored for instant viewing by the board and the press. The lies framed the gentle father as the mastermind behind the massive data leak. It mapped out a clever digital trail that placed the security breach right when this loving father was inside the server room. It looked highly detailed and consistent, but it was a complete fabrication. This cruel trap was crafted by someone who thoroughly understood corporate trust, spending weeks setting up a scheme to ruin an innocent life. Sebastian delivered his false accusations with cold, smug assurance, like a tyrant handing down a sentence he had already decided. Grace listened quietly, her heart anchored in a new gentle strength as he spoke. Then she calmly asked for a 20-minute break. We both know that arrogant look of someone who thinks they are untouchable. But Grace had spent those 11 days quietly seeking the truth. She reached out to Priya, a former network specialist there. She had resigned 8 months ago, holding no corporate loyalty and no reason to hide anything. Priya confirmed an odd system glitch she had spotted back then. She stayed silent initially, not realizing she was witnessing a digital theft. Forensic accountants then traced a massive payout sent through a shell firm straight to a top executive at their chief rival company. Cyber experts also uncovered a hidden secondary login. It belonged not to the gentle father, but directly to the thief. Grace had secretly contacted federal investigators 9 days ago, gathering undeniable proof while they ran a quiet parallel inquiry. She returned to that tense boardroom, accompanied by federal officers and absolute proof. Sebastian was immediately placed under arrest right inside the room at 10:47 a.m., in front of 12 stunned board members, along with 4 attorneys and 2 executive assistants. And one quiet, resolute CEO, he was led away in handcuffs, while his panicked lawyer was still shouting on a speakerphone. A profound silence blanketed the room, heavy with the realization of what just happened. Then Grace stood, ready to make a choice that shocked everyone. She announced she was stepping down as leader of Holloway Dynamics. Let's pause here. Those quiet words settled in the silence like a healing balm. Her attorney tried to protest, but she raised a hand to stop him. Guided by a newfound compassion, she finally spoke with a warm open. She shared the heavy news with a gentle, steady grace. For 6 years, her career was everything. But you and I know she nearly let it steal the warmth and love that actually mattered. She promised to help guide them until the change was complete. She called her old company resilient. But they needed a leader whose heart hadn't been hardened by grief and heavy armor. She thanked her late father for a legacy built on real care. Caleb's name went unsaid. Their connection ran far too deep for words. Patricia, a board member in her 40s, watched her with quiet empathy. She had championed Grace from day one, always believing in her spirit. Patricia held her gaze and whispered, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Grace nodded softly, packing up her desk. She walked out looking like someone who had finally dropped a crushing, invisible burden she had carried for far too long. In the elevator, somewhere around the 20th floor, her walls crumbled and she wept softly all the way to the lobby. 6 weeks later, Lily's surgery was a beautiful success. The cardiologist called the recovery absolutely textbook, and Grace, who had been too frightened to even imagine the outcome, knew instantly this was the best news of her life. Caleb had waited in that quiet room for 4 hours, and when the doctor brought the good news, he went completely still, then let go, burying his face in his hands. Not out of sorrow, but from a profound, "Have you felt that?" The pure relief of a heavy weight finally being lifted. Grace simply sat close, offering the gentle comfort of her presence, rather than filling the quiet with empty words. 10 days after the operation, Lily finally came home, looking delicate and tired, but so beautifully herself, playfully complaining about her pillows, dinner, and how terribly boring daytime television really was. She even drew a sweet, detailed picture of her healing heart. Remembering the doctor's drawing, she labeled every part with bright, joyful care. Grace proudly got it framed. 3 weeks later, Grace stepped inside the apartment and found it completely still. Not abandoned, rent was covered, and Lily's colorful drawings still warmed the walls. Library books sat waiting by the door, but Caleb was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Alvarez down the hall mentioned Caleb had left a gentle message for her. He wanted her to meet him at Reed Street Park, a peaceful little green space right by the children's hospital. It was small, just a narrow patch of grass nestled between two tall apartment buildings. Usually it served as a quiet sanctuary for families from the pediatric ward, a gentle spot to catch your breath between heavy, difficult moments. But now, everything was beautifully different. It is easy to miss simple kindness, but where cracked concrete and broken benches once sat, there was now a beautiful playground built with deep, loving care. It had safe ramps and soft edges, built specifically for children healing from heavy surgeries. Warm, welcoming benches offered a resting place for exhausted parents. Near the entrance was a lovely, hand-painted sign. And there was Caleb, kneeling gently by one of the sturdy wooden posts. He tightened a heavy bolt while little Lily sat close by, happily bossing her dad around. She supervised his work with the absolute confidence of a tiny project manager. Grace noticed 2 other men building the next section, just kind neighbors helping out. Local folks who pitched in simply because this quiet, gentle father had asked them. We can easily picture her face as she finally realized where the money actually went. He had used every dollar the CEO secretly routed through that medical charity. Every single dollar built this lovely playground, and not even for Lily. It was built for every anxious family waiting helplessly inside that cold hospital. Families who just needed a safe, happy place for their sick kids to play. He drew the designs, secured the city permits, and built it over 3 long weekends. Yet he never kept a single dime to pay his own family's heavy medical bills. Even though a mountain of debt was still waiting at home. Grace stood still at the edge of the grass, completely lost for words. Not from trying to stay tough. The heavy walls around her heart were crumbling down. She was just absolutely, totally silenced by the pure, unselfish heart of this quiet, gentle man. It was not just the playground itself, though the gift was beautiful. Think about what that kind of selfless love tells us about a person. Choosing pure kindness while carrying a heavy, silent burden, when no one was watching or keeping score. Caleb finally looked up from his tools and saw her standing there, watching. For a long, quiet moment he stayed silent. Then he simply said, without needing any praise, "There are kids who need it more than we do." His voice was steady, completely humble, and utterly free of any pride. Little Lily finally noticed Grace standing quietly on the grass, and immediately started babbling to anyone who would listen about how the bright new slide was the absolute best, and she had tested it twice already. Grace stepped forward. She still could not find any words, so she did not force it. She just sat in the dirt beside him, their shoulders barely a single breath apart, and then guided only by a gentle, quiet instinct, giving in to the one beautiful truth that suddenly mattered more than anything else. She gently, softly rested her tired head against his shoulder, finally leaning into a warm safety she had spent so many years trying to outrun. Caleb froze for just a single delicate heartbeat, just as he had on that late-night flight when a tired stranger first leaned on him. Then he slowly put his wrench aside. He wrapped a protective arm around her, pulling her close, while little Lily watched from her blanket, looking very alert. She wore the satisfied look of a 6-year-old who knew exactly how her family's story should end. Golden afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the young trees planted along the fence. Down the street, a hospital monitor still beeped its quiet, steady rhythm. But here the air was filled with the joyful sounds of healing kids and happy parents. And for the very first time, in longer than you or I could possibly imagine, this quiet peace was finally enough. Back on that flight when Caleb first protected this exhausted woman, she had no idea who he was. Now she understood his hidden warmth and he truly saw hers. This time he pulled her close, holding tight to the beautiful, healing future they were building together.